Hi everyone, welcome to WION Live broadcast from New York City. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani. We're going to take a look at this hour's headlines first. Afghanistan's interior minister issues a threat to Islamabad, saying that if the country's Taliban elders decide to take serious action, there will be no trace of Pakistan left. This comes in the aftermath of deadly Pakistani airstrikes on Afghanistan. Students at Tehran's Al-Zahra University take part in anti-government protests. The protesters are heard chanting, "We'll fight, we'll die, we'll reclaim Iran." India unveils a Prahar, the first ever comprehensive national counter-terrorism policy and strategy. This marks a shift from earlier reactive incident-based approach to a proactive preventive framework for threats. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney will travel to India, Australia, and Japan from February 26 to March 7. Carney will meet Prime Minister Modi, Australian Prime Minister Albanese, and Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi during his visit to the three countries. United Nations chief warns human rights are under assault worldwide, cites widespread abuses of international law and devastating civilian suffering in conflicts in Sudan, Gaza, and Ukraine. Crude oil trades flat ahead of third round of talks between U.S. and Iran in Geneva on Thursday. Brent trades around $71 a barrel. U.S. oil trades around $66 per barrel. And New York City is facing over 38 centimeters of snow as a major winter storm batters to U.S. Northeast. New York is reeling under the effects of a bomb cyclone, which has brought the city to a halt. Here in New York, we are in the midst of a massive blizzard dubbed to be a historic snowstorm, one of its kind to hit the East Coast since 2016. The powerful bomb cyclone is blasting across the Northeast, bringing wind gusts ranging at 60 miles per hour and life-threatening blizzard conditions. New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia have now been placed under blizzard warnings. The weather system has been dumping heavy snow at rates of 1 to 3 inches per hour, creating whiteouts and widespread power outages. More than 250,000 customers are without power right now as blizzard conditions blast the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. New Jersey is seeing the highest number of power outages, with more than 100,000 people being plunged into complete darkness. Both New York City and New Jersey have now announced travel bans, with airlines canceling thousands of flights. The state of emergency has now been declared across the state.
Across New Jersey, we expect between 10 to 20 inches of snow. The heaviest snow right now is expected along the coast. The heaviest snowfall is expected between Sunday night and Monday morning. Snowfall during this time could reach 2 inches per hour. Winds will be much stronger than the storm in January, between 35 and 50 miles an hour.
Meanwhile, in New York, winter storm continues to pummel the city, dumping record-breaking snowfall across the tri-state area. In some parts of the city, snowfall measuring as much as 10 inches was recorded, including Long Island. The National Weather Service warned of hazardous conditions and said a blizzard warning could remain in effect for Staten Island and other boroughs of New York throughout Monday. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani has ordered a temporary halt to most travel across the city from Sunday through noon on Monday as an emergency precaution. Public schools are closed on Monday and students will not shift to remote learning. It's a full snow day. Non-essential city offices and services, including libraries, will also shut down to the public during this period.
Due to these factors, we are declaring a state of emergency and instituting a travel ban starting at 9 p.m. this evening and ending at 12 p.m. tomorrow. The state of emergency closes the streets, highways, and bridges of New York City for all traffic, cars, trucks, scooters, and e-bikes, with some specific exemptions for essential and emergency movement. We are asking New Yorkers to avoid all non-essential travel. Please, for your safety, stay home, stay inside, and stay off the roads.
The city has declared a state of emergency and wrapped up its sanitation operations, deploying more than 2,000 snowplows to clear streets. Over 2,600 sanitation workers will be on 12-hour shifts to manage the response. Officials are also placing significant emphasis on protecting the homeless in New York, who account for a large portion of the fatalities during the last major winter storm. The powerful North Atlantic cyclone is now also battering Philadelphia and several counties across Pennsylvania. Forecasters say the storm could dump between 14 and 20 inches of snow in suburban areas and parts of Delaware, with wind gusts reaching up to 45 miles an hour. Officials have declared a state of emergency and imposed a ban on non-essential travel as conditions worsen.
I'm about to go for a ride in a Wave robotaxi. These self-driving vehicles could soon be going into commercial service on the streets of London. But first, they've got to go through a series of trials and tests, including with a safety driver.
I think I spend more time not driving behind the wheel than driving. If anything is not appropriate or needs correcting, like a learner driver, we're there to teach it.
Autonomous driving is one of the most complex engineering problems we have today. It requires developing a safety-critical system that's affordable to be mass manufactured around the world and has the flexibility to operate in many markets. We believe at Wave that there is a new approach, an end-to-end AI-driven approach.
Well, we spent about 10 or 15 minutes driving around London in this Wave self-driving taxi. I have to say the ride's been pretty smooth. I can't really tell the difference. It's hard to tell that there's a machine driving the car instead of a human. The car has been pretty decisive and also cautious when it needs to be.
You learn 320 runs that crisscross away, and then you just repeat, you get them in your head, and then when you go for exams, they'll ask you any random point to any random point in London, and you will need to navigate from A to B, naming every single street. Will it be a fad? Technology is evolving. Okay, we're not riding horses and carts. Are we there yet? No way. I don't think that. I don't want to be like an ignorant taxi driver. It's like, no, we're not there yet. I can't see it.
Burned-out cars blocked roads across 20 Mexican states on Sunday as drug cartels reacted to the death of drug lord Nemesis Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. Known as El Mencho, Oseguera Cervantes was killed by the army during an operation to capture him in Tapalpa in Jalisco state. Jalisco's capital, Guadalajara, was turned into a ghost town on Sunday night as civilians hunkered down. School was cancelled on Monday in several states. Authorities reported at least 14 people dead, including 7 National Guard troops. Mexico is under pressure from the United States to crack down on the cartels and cut off the huge quantities of fentanyl and other drugs trafficked across the border. The White House confirmed that the U.S. provided intelligence support to the operation to capture the cartel leader.
This is Dabu 7. You're looking at a pan across Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. As you can see many fires burning here as the cartels have set fire to many different vehicles, buses, businesses, and the war is ongoing. You can hear the big guns right here on this helicopter that's shooting at cartel members below. Americans being warned to get out of Mexico now, out of these areas. You can see what's happening, just sitting there eating a meal. People got to get up and run. The cartels are coming in, they're torching gas stations. They're seizing anything that they can for leverage. This is what people have to deal with all over the place in Mexico right now. The official word right now is that when they went in and they killed El Mencho, the U.S. had intelligence helping the Mexican army and the special forces. You could say that you should get ready for blowback. Because now that they're working with them hand in hand, well, they're working with them hand in hand to attack them, so they are the enemy in the cartel's eyes. So they're going to get attacked. They're going to be open for hits. That puts the United States, anything on the border, front line right now from here on out. We just had this incursion with the drone thing here this past week, and now this. This is along the scale of what I've been waiting for the entire time, for things to kind of explode in Mexico. All because Trump put an executive order into motion on day 1 of this term that told us something huge was going to come of this. They waited all the way till now, and it looks like it's going into motion. Now, they also have other factions to deal with out here. They make mention of this Isidro Meza Flores rising to power over another group, another cartel that's down there, that is in cahoots with other cartels. You've got many cartels down here fighting, so to speak, over power, especially on the western side, and this spills into Sinaloa. Okay? So you've got this Meza Flores. They call him the El Chapo Isidro. Okay, he is the former lieutenant in the Beltran Leyva organization, and he has spent the past year expanding the Guasave cartel. Guasave cartel, that's a major one down here. He also connected in an alliance with the Mayito Flaco group. So the Mayiza faction with the Guasavs here, and there's a conflict within Sinaloa. So this is large scale, and it looks like U.S. military is helping the Mexican government or army at this point in time, side by side, going in and targeting some of these members. So where this goes from here, yet to be seen. They could work together, expanding into all these regions, and it's going to cause for blowback here on the home front. There's no way it's not going to happen. I would expect it beyond just the border. So heads on a swivel for this one from here on out.
If you want to understand international politics today, it is very important to keep in mind that we are in a new Cold War. the United States is waging Cold War II against China. And part of Washington's strategy is to try to recruit partners in Asia in order to encircle and contain China. Bloomberg referred to this as the Trump administration's grand encirclement plan, but it's not just the Trump administration. It was the same in the Joe Biden administration and the Obama administration before that. Bloomberg reported that the countries that the U.S. is trying to partner with in order to isolate China as part of this grand encirclement strategy are Japan, South Korea, India, and Vietnam. And if you listen to hawkish anti-China think tanks in Washington, they constantly talk about how Vietnam has become a close U.S. partner and the U.S. is going to use Vietnam in order to weaken China. That's the narrative you constantly hear in Washington. And it is true that Vietnam has tried to maintain a non-aligned foreign policy, balancing both sides of this new Cold War. Vietnam refers to its foreign policy strategy as one of bamboo diplomacy. So Vietnam has balanced close relations with China and Russia and also the US and US allies like South Korea, which is why a lot of people in the West may have been surprised to see a bombshell story that was published in February in the Western media revealing that according to an internal document from Vietnam's Ministry of Defense, Vietnam has been preparing for a possible second war with the United States. This article noted that Vietnam is preparing for a possible American war of aggression, and Hanoi considers the U.S. to be a belligerent power. The Vietnamese government also fears a U.S.-backed color revolution attempt to try to overthrow the Communist Party, like the US-backed color revolutions in Ukraine and the Philippines, among many other countries. Vietnam's Ministry of Defense noted that the US empire is trying to encircle and weaken China, and it pointed out that the US may apply unconventional forms of warfare and military intervention and even invasions of countries that deviate from the US empire's orbit. The AP report pointed out that far from viewing the U.S. as a strategic partner, Hanoi sees Washington as an existential threat and has no intention of joining its anti-China alliance.
ביום רביעי יגיע הנה ראש ממשלת הודו, נרנדרה מודי, הוא יישא נאום בכנסת, אני בטוח שכולכם תהיו שם, ואנחנו גם נקיים אירוע חדשנות בירושלים, נבקר יחד ביד ושם. מרקם היחסים הלך והתהדק, והוא יבוא הנה כדי שנוכל להדק אותו עוד יותר בסדרה של החלטות שקשורות להידוק בשיתוף פעולה בין הממשלות, בין המדינות, שיתוף פעולה כלכלי, שיתוף פעולה מדיני ושיתוף פעולה ביטחוני. בחזון שאני רואה בנגד עיניי, אנחנו נייצר מערכת שלמה, בעצם מין משושה של בריתות סביב ובתוך הים התיכון, בתוך המזרח התיכון. זה כולל את הודו, זה כולל מדינות ערביות, זה כולל גם את מדינות אפריקניות וגם מדינות בים התיכון, יוון, קפריסין וגם מדינות באסיה שלא אפרט כרגע. הכוונה כאן הוא ליצור ציר של מדינות שרואות את המציאות ואת האתגרים ואת היעדים בעין אחת, מול הצירים הרדיקליים, גם הציר הרדיקלי השיעי, שאנחנו מקים בו, הקינו בו חזק מאוד, וגם מול הציר המתהווה, הציר הסוני הרדיקלי. המדינות האלה כולן שותפות לתפיסה אחרת. והשיתוף פעולה בינינו יכול להניב פירות גדולים מאוד, וגם כמובן להבטיח את חוסננו ועתידנו.
In the Middle East this morning amid the standoff between the U.S. and Iran over that country's nuclear program and future ambitions. The Pentagon has deployed more than 120 aircrafts to the Middle East in addition to the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Force in the Arabian Sea. And of course, the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, is on its way. President Trump said this week that the Ayatollah has at maximum 2 weeks to reach a deal before, quote, bad things happen. At a ceremony honoring Iran's Paralympians on Saturday, Iran's president says his nation will not back down.
We will not bow down in the face of any of these difficulties. World powers are lining up with cowardice to force us to bow our heads. Just as you did not bow down in the face of difficulties, we will not bow down in the face of these problems.
Now, in the wake of these ongoing threats, at least 4 other nations, aside from the U.S., Sweden, Serbia, Poland, and Australia, have advised their citizens living in Iran to leave the country. Here with us now is retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton, News Nation senior national security contributor. Always good to see you, General. Good morning.
Good morning, Hannah. Always good to be with you.
You and I have talked about this for the past few days now. President Trump said on Thursday that Iran had, quote, 10 to 15 days maximum to make a deal. What do you think of this timeline?
Well, first and foremost, the president absolutely wants to and has set a top priority of coming through with a diplomatic solution. But I think time is running out on the Ayatollah and Iran at this point. You're seeing the largest massing of U.S. firepower really since 2003 when we invaded Iraq. You mentioned you have the USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group has now made it past the Strait of Gibraltar, is heading east to the Mediterranean and towards Israel. We have the almost 1/3 of U.S. naval capabilities in the region are forming there. So the stakes are raising high, and I believe the president is looking at a wide range of options. First, to continue tough diplomatic discussions with Iran. Secondly, there are non-kinetic aspects of this, perhaps cyber. But then also he's really weighing a limited strike option that could be perhaps pursued in the next couple of days. And then there's a massive shock and awe military campaign that I guarantee the president's looking at options as well.
General, as you well know, it's been 23 years since we've seen that much air power and naval assets in the Middle East, and that was the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Is it more of a question of when than if when it comes to these strikes?
I believe it is, and the fact that we've amassed such a strong U.S. military capability, but also since 2003, we've demonstrated the capability, but also the will to use that capability. Most recently, during the Israeli 12-day air campaign, culminating by the United States in that 22 June significant bombing attack by U.S. B-2 bombers and U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles against Iranian nuclear weapons sites and so forth. So the president has a little bit of a wind at his back here with regard to demonstrating that capability, and that he will follow up on those pronouncements. But again, the president, I believe the United States, position right now would much prefer a diplomatic solution. That's nearly impossible, however, to deal with the Iranians diplomatically. And if you even cut a deal, it's most difficult to even trust them to follow through.
I remember back in June, the president spoke about the bombing campaign against 3 Iranian nuclear sites, saying it was monumental damage was done. Now, forward a few months later, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the attacks obliterated Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons. So why are we discussing more strikes and more nuclear negotiation talks? How did we go from an obliterated nuclear program to this current situation so quickly?
Well, the challenge is with the Iranians themselves. They still are trying to pursue a nuclear weapons capability despite that significant successful attack on the evening of June 22nd. Secondly, they're also pursuing and have maintained a significant ballistic missile capability, and that will put at threat not only U.S. forces and U.S. national security interests, but our friends and allies in the regions, such as Israel and the Gulf allies. Third, they're still supporting terrorist proxy organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and those paramilitary groups, terrorist groups in Iraq, even though they've been somewhat put on their heels since 10/7, but nonetheless, they're still supporting terrorism. The other aspect of this is what's happened since starting on December 28th was, there's a human aspect to this with the Iranians protesting in the streets, but Iran, the theocracy, the Ayatollah, and my numbers now tell me have killed up to 10,000 Iranians in the streets. Also, they've jailed tens of thousands as well. And the president made a promise to them that he's got their back. So all that thrown in there, this is new. Continuing, however, how Iran approaches their, relationship not only with their own people, but how they still want to, have dominion over the Middle East.
The world's most advanced supercarrier has reached the front line, but behind the steel hull, a silent crisis is brewing. Washington has triggered the largest military surge since the 2003 Iraq invasion. But now reports indicate that the mighty USS Gerald Ford grapples with a crippling sewage crisis. America's top warship faces readiness doubts just when war looms largest.
Warships stack the horizon. Fighter jets rotate through desert bases. Missile defense batteries lock into position. This is the largest American military buildup in West Asia since the Iraq War. US already has the USS Abraham Lincoln in the region. Now it is joined by another aircraft carrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced and powerful aircraft carrier ever built. A 100,000-ton nuclear-powered giant, capable of launching more sorties per day than any carrier before it, armed with stealth fighters, surveillance aircraft, and electronic warfare systems, a floating fortress designed to dominate sea and sky. But beneath the deck, questions are rising. Recent reports reveal that the Ford's crew has been grappling with a persistent sewage system crisis. Waste backing up, maintenance crews stretched. The U.S. Navy's top leadership had previously warned that extending deployments could damage maintenance cycles and strain sailors already operating at high tempo. Facing a grave threat, Iran has assembled a diverse and sophisticated arsenal designed to confront the U.S. Armada. Supreme Leader Khamenei declares U.S. carriers as sinkable targets, boasting of dangerous weapons. Tehran amplifies the threat with chilling AI-generated videos showing U.S. aircraft carriers engulfed in flames.
I think there is no limited strikes. An act of aggression would be regarded as an act of aggression, period. And any state would react to an act of aggression as part of its inherent right of self-defense ferociously. So that's what we would do.
Tehran is making it clear that a U.S. attack of any scale would spur the Islamic Republic to respond ferociously. This after President Donald Trump said he was considering limited strikes against the country. The two countries concluded a second round of indirect talks in Switzerland under Omani mediation. Further talks confirmed by Iran and Oman are scheduled for Thursday. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
A diplomatic shockwave has just hit Europe. Not with missiles or naval clash, but a declaration this time. And sometimes word can escalate faster than the weapons, right? You're watching Times XP, it's me, Dhriti Atmi, and Iran has taken a drastic step after the European Union moved to blacklist the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps under its counter-terrorism framework. Tehran responded with a decision of its own, a retaliatory one. Iran announced that it now considers the naval and air forces of European Union member states as terrorist entities under its domestic law. Yes, entire branches of military forces. Now that is not symbolic language. That is a serious diplomatic escalation. Now let's pause here. You know what triggered this? The European Union's designation of the IRGC. That move placed the Iranian military body under sanctions. Assets freezed. Financial restrictions, travel ban across the European Union territory for Tehran. Assets freezes, financial restriction, travel ban, and that too across European Union territory. Now for Tehran, that was crossing a red line. Iran says that the European Union decision was unlawful. It calls it politically motivated, and it has now invoked its own reciprocal legislation, similar to what it used after the United States labeled the IRGC a terrorist organization years ago. Basically, it's a tit for tat diplomacy. Sanction for sanction, label for label, but here is why this matters. The IRGC is not just any organization. It plays a central role in Iran's military, their regional operation, their internal security structure. Now, blacklisting it is not just a small move. It touches the core of Iran's power system. Now, imagine the ripple effect here. European military personnel operating in the Middle East. Naval ships patrolling international waters. Air forces flying missions under NATO frameworks. Suddenly, from Tehran's perspective, these are no longer just neutral actors. They are official, designated adversaries. This is not yet a shooting conflict though, but it is a diplomatic battlefield. And it now is at a tense moment. Nuclear negotiations are fragile. Regional conflicts are ongoing and tensions with Washington, specifically amid the political backdrop involving Donald Trump, it remains high. Now, when diplomacy narrows, rhetoric sharpens. And when rhetoric sharpens, miscalculation becomes more likely. And that is a risk now. Across Europe, well, the response is cautious but really firm. The European Union stands by its decision. It says that the IRGC's action justified the designation here. Tehran says Europe has overstepped. Well, neither side appears ready to back down. But you know what we are seeing here? A widening rift between Iran and NATO-aligned powers. Sanctions deepening, trust eroding, communication strained. This is not a battlefield strike, but it is a diplomatic strike. A label with consequences, because once you brand a military force as a terrorist entity, you are not just criticizing their policy, and redefining relationships in geopolitics can reshape alliances, operations, and negotiations. The question now is critical. Will this remain a diplomatic standoff, or will rising tensions spill into something more dangerous? Because for now, no missiles are flying, but diplomatic temperature have clearly risen. And in today's volatile environment, escalation does not always begin with explosions. Sometimes it begins with the declaration, "We will sink them all." That is a warning now coming out of Tehran. Sharp, direct, and unapologetic here, and it is aimed straight at Washington. Well, the US has moved very powerful warships into the region. The world knows about it. Steel giant cutting through the strategic water. Fire jets on the standby here. In the meantime, carrier strike groups, they are positioned. A visible show of force. In fact, among them, the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of America's most advanced aircraft carriers, sailing alongside with the guided missile destroyer USS Winston S. Churchill. Together they form a floating fortress. It's a message, it's a warning, but Tehran is not impressed. Brigadier General Mohammad Jafar Asadi, he has dismissed the deployment as political theater. Basically a propaganda phase, a show. Well, his words suggest that Iran sees this as a psychological pressure and not preparation for the war. And then came the counter warning. Any miscalculation, he said, it would trigger a devastating response. No hesitation. There was no retreat. There was just a response. This comes as US President Donald Trump publicly stated that he is considering possible military action. Now that single word, considering, has kind of sent shockwaves through global markets, diplomatic channels, and defense headquarters as well. Because when warships move and leaders, they talk of options, the stakes do rise. Well, to understand the picture, carrier strike groups, they do not deploy casually. They project air power, missile capability, rapid response force. Their presence alone can change calculation across a region. But Iran is signaling something equally clear. It will not be intimidated. Its message? Warships can sail, jets can fly, but any direct strike will be answered. And this is a dangerous part. Neither side is firing right now. Yet, both the sides, they are signaling strength, threats. And in geopolitics, signaling, it can sometimes be louder than action. The Mediterranean right now, ladies and gentlemen, the Gulf, strategic waterways, they are now carrying more than commercial traffic. They carry tension. Every radar signal, every maneuver, every statement from a podium, watched, interpreted, and calculated. The question now is extremely simple. Is this deterrence, or is this the slow drumbeat before something much bigger? Because when very powerful fleets, they move and strong words follow, the margin for error it kind of shrinks. For now, the ships continue their transit. For now, the statements continue from both the capitals, but the world watches, because in moments like this, it only takes one misstep to turn rhetoric into comment. Just a few sentences in an interview, but those words, they have now triggered a diplomatic firestorm across the Middle East. And at the center of it, a debate over land, faith, and power. It all began when Mike Huckabee, he spoke during an interview with Tucker Carlson. Now, in that particular conversation, he referred to biblical interpretation linked to Jewish claims to the land with ancient promises made to Abraham. He suggested that Israel's claim, according to religious belief, it could extend beyond its current border. Those remarks, it did not go unnoticed, by the way. It exploded across the religion and the region. Why? Because in the Middle East, borders are not just lines on the map. They are political red lines, historical scars, national identities, and any suggestion of expanding them, even theoretically, it sets off the alarms. Very quickly, by the way, reactions poured in. Saudi Arabia condemned the remarks. So did Egypt. So did Jordan. Regional blocs such as the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation issued strong statements. They described the comments as dangerous, provocative, and inconsistent with the official US policy. The phrase that resurfaced, Greater Israel, a concept rooted in religious and ideological interpretation, suggesting that biblical Israel once extended beyond today's internationally recognized border. For many in Arab and Muslim world, that phrase, it is deeply sensitive because it touches on questions of sovereignty, on Palestinian statehood, on decades of unresolved conflict, and suddenly a theoretical reference became a geopolitical crisis. Social media debates intensified. Diplomats, they scrambled to clarify the position, and governments sought assurances. Wait, is this official US policy or just a personal interpretation? That question echoes across capitals. Reports suggest that Saudi leadership demanded clarification from Washington here because for Riyadh, regional stability is not optional. It is strategic, and any perception of territorial expansion rhetoric risks inflaming the tension at the time when the region is already fragile. Let's pause here. It's not about immediate troop movement. There is no war. Not at all. The borders, they have not changed. There is no new map that has been drawn, but in diplomacy, words matter, specifically when they touch on religion and land. Specifically in a region where history is never far from the present. Well, the controversy has reopened an old debate. How do religious narratives intersect with modern international law? Where does belief and policy begin? And how quickly can a single interview can reshape the regional disclosure here? Across the Middle East, governments are watching extremely closely because rhetoric, even if unofficial, it can shift perceptions. And ladies and gentlemen, in geopolitics, perception often drives the reaction. For now, there is no policy change announced, no territorial declaration that is made, but the diplomatic temperature, it has clearly risen. Statements, they have hardened. In fact, alliances, they are seeking reassurance now. And yes, in the end, the Greater Israel, that particular phrase is once again dominating the headlines. Here we have one interview, one reference, and an entire region on the edge.